This is the K-State Radio Network. You're listening to Agriculture Today. The grain markets have been digesting new numbers from the USDA released yesterday, most importantly of which the prospective plantings report from the department. And this is a set of numbers eagerly awaited by the markets each spring. Dan O'Brien has had a full look at those, and he includes his comments on those numbers in his analysis for this week. Grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Dan, if you, for one, focus on the corn and soybean numbers, the prospective plantings, both lent an immediate boost to their respective markets yesterday.
Yeah, the markets revealed what they're paying attention to. In the face of really some fairly weak usage numbers that came out of the stocks report, indicating higher than expected stocks as of March 1 for corn and for soybeans. We basically saw the market react with laser focus to lower acreage numbers, lower than expected acreage numbers for both corn and soybeans. And we saw corn futures move up, upfront contracts 14 and a half cents, all the way from the May through December contracts for corn. For soybeans, everything was up from May through August, basically 26 3/4 to 27 and a half cents. September and November up 31 and a quarter cents. So pretty strong response, really. And I think that we need to come back next week and see how the markets have reconciled some of these different types of information coming in. Again, the weakness in some of the demand side of that, to see if we hold those gains for the next week or not. But you know what? We'll take the gains. And what all the shouting is about was that prospective planting numbers for corn came in at about 88 million acres, again on the corn side, down from the last numbers that were out at about 90 million that USDA had put out in the February 23rd Ag Outlook Conference. And the soybean numbers also were down to 89 million acres. Expectations were they'd be up 1 or 2 million acres, and for most folks. So you had both the corn and the soybean projected planting acres for 2018 coming in below what the market was expecting. So that was a surprise, and a fairly hefty surprise. Now, if it would have come in 2 or 3 million acres less than that, that would have been quite a surprise. This was a sort of a surprise. It is something to think on, too, that when you look deeper into some of our other Kansas crops, particularly grain sorghum, that there still is projected to be an increase for grain sorghum over a year ago, up about 310,000 acres or so. But we were anticipating that number to be up about 1 million acres. So some of the trade issues that particularly hit on grain sorghum had affected, apparently, expectations of prices and profitability to the degree that there's some cutback on that.
Now, the advent of soybeans at 89 million acres, eclipsing corn at 88, that's the first time that soybeans have done so in some while. And that has to then parlay over into the soybean to corn price ratio, does it not? Well,
yes, it did yesterday to some degree, but not as much as you might have thought. Frankly, on yesterday's closes, May to May, basically, soybeans to corn is about 2.69 as a ratio. But the new crop number that we're paying attention to for planning purposes is still about November soybeans over December corn, about 2.55, and that's down just marginally. So basically, they both went up just about the same. Soybeans just a little bit more. And so, again, not a lot has changed there. And even the USDA pointed this out as they looked at basically the type of changes they typically see from the March prospective planting survey to the June acreage survey. And there's room for change now. We see on social media that there are fields in the southern part of the U.S. that are already done planting. Mm-hmm. But again, we're heading now off into April. If we have open fields, we'll have pretty aggressive planting that we've seen more and more of that over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I don't doubt we'll be seeing some of this happening quite soon in Kansas and states from here on to the north. But I think a question to wrestle with or try to think on is how will numbers like this potentially impact farmers' decisions to plant on different crops that they're considering. And if corn prices are holding up decently, and gosh, it's great open dry fields and good weather, they'll tend to plant even more corn than they might have otherwise. On the other side, if we have some planting problems for soybeans, some flooding, whatever is particularly in the eastern corn belt, then you may push some corn acres out the backside of the planting window off into soybean acres. So we'll see what happens. But at least these numbers that we have now, the 88 for corn, for 88 million acres planted, the 89 some for soybeans are the new metrics, and we'll gauge expectations of the market based off of that for the next 2 or 3 or 4 months until we get the acreage report at the end of June.
That said, Dan, it can't be denied that dry conditions still prevail, and we know about that here in the central and the southern plains, but even in the northern corn belt, and that may, in fact, influence producers toward more spring wheat acreage.
Yes, a couple things happening to the north of us. As you'd indicated, the surprise in terms of the wheat planted acreage number was that we have about 2 million more acres of spring wheat projected to be planted coming out of these surveys that USDA conducted than we had the previous year. And so as they were contacting those farmers, I guess in an area that had been such a for years and years and continues to be a strong spring wheat area in the face of low corn prices, low soybean prices relative to their cost structure, they have apparently shifted back to a crop that they know they can grow and that the prices hadn't been too bad on for higher protein wheat over the last several months, and that would be spring wheat. So that's one of the surprises, I guess, of this report, that basically, again, with corn and soybeans being less than thought would be planted by the market coming into this report, the two crops that are showing higher than expected acreage were cotton and hard red spring wheat. Also, something to look at when you look at some of the factors that are leading to some of these dynamics up in the spring wheat production areas in the market, we're concerned about dry conditions that we've had coming out of literally most of Mexico on into Texas, on into the Oklahoma Panhandle area, Oklahoma-Texas Panhandle, and on into Kansas, and been watching the impact of that on hard red winter wheat and our other crop prospects. But you look at the weather maps over the last 30 days and notice how dry basically the eastern half of Canada is, and see the impact of that dryness now coming down into Wisconsin, Michigan, down into some of the eastern Corn Belt states, Ohio, northernmost part of Indiana, Pennsylvania being affected, even some movement on over into the eastern part of Minnesota. So, again, why point this out? Well, just as we've seen the last 30 to 60 to 90 days, yes, moisture can come and can change all this, but right now it seems that the threat of dry weather to the U.S. Corn Belt from the east isn't coming from our direction. It's coming from the northeastern states, from Canada on down. So it's no doubt too early to be really worried about that a lot, but still it's there, and it just bears watching and could have an impact on production prospects and prices going forward. And if this report showed anything, really what the market's watching is production prospects. So we have the potential for volatility for these crops, particularly corn, first and foremost, because it's out first on the plantings. And we'll see where we go from there.
And you talked of it a little while ago, but to put it this way, the steady hum of hefty grain stocks, well, that will carry the day to some extent, at least as part of what's ahead here.
I think that the stocks report figures will be the issues reflected in the upcoming April 10th WASDE report. Again, those WASDE reports aren't going to show any projections for the 2018-19 marketing year or the 2018 crop until we get into the May report. So what will, quote, hit us will be probably pessimism on the part of usage for soybeans and corn. And for corn, all else being equal, we'll probably hold the feed residual number as it is and probably expand stocks a little bit. Really, the question is, what do you do with soybeans with 21% higher stocks than thought? Mm-hmm. That number came in based on a couple things that we have a fairly good track and handle on, i.e. exports and some crush. So out of all that, given all that we know, we came in with 21% higher stocks than expected. So we're already sitting at 500 and some, 555, I think, million bushels of carryout stocks projected for this marketing year, the one ending August 31st. So where do we go? Do we go to 600, 700? Just a very thought-provoking thing.
Well, all of these USDA numbers, prospective plantings, the stocks numbers, everything that was released yesterday, all captured in Dan's weekly notes on the grain markets and those factors influencing those trends. That's at agmanager.info, just posted at agmanager.info. And we'll talk again next Friday, Dan. Many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
That from grain market economist Dan O'Brien, K-State Research and Extension, from his office in Colby. And Agriculture Today will be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back. You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. The Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at Kansas State University recently hosted an individual from Colorado State University who is well-versed in livestock reproduction. He was brought in to present the 24th Kirchhoff Physiology Lecture in the department, which honors a longtime scientist here at the university, Guy Kirchhoff. Joining us now is Dr. George Seidel. He is an animal scientist at Colorado State and a distinguished professor there who is an expert in animal reproduction technologies. And George, you've been at this for quite a while. First of all, we'd like to thank you for being here and have you tell a bit about your background and your area of interest.
Okay, well, first it's been great to be invited, and it's been most enjoyable. So I grew up on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania and went to college to learn dairy cattle management. And then it was a slippery slope. I then got a master's degree and a PhD degree, and so eventually ended up as a professor at Colorado State University. And I've been there since 1971. I am theoretically retired, but it's not working. So we've been lucky to work in the area of assisted reproduction, things like embryo transfer, in vitro fertilization, sexed semen. Some work with cloning, some work with genetically modified individuals, and so on. So that's what I do, or what my students do.
So you've had a front row seat at the evolution of these technologies over time. And you think back to 1971 when you first got started, we've seen some remarkable advances, haven't we?
Yes, we have. For example, in those days, there was essentially no embryo transfer done on the farm and so on. And now there are some hundreds of thousands of calves born each year from embryo transfer. And while it's a small percentage, it's the calves that end up being the breeding males that the bull studs will have, and so on. So it's embryo transfer, for example, has an inordinate influence on the genetics that farmers use via the sons and the grandsons and the granddaughters of these animals. So the last 20 years I've been working on sexed semen. And what we've done there is we've taken a laboratory curiosity, basically, and made it practical. And it's not perfect. The sex ratios will be about 90% accurate, not 100. But to get 90% heifer calves or 90% steer calves, depending on your objectives, is quite valuable. The fertility is a little bit lower with the sex semen because we damage the sperm a little bit in the process, but we try to minimize those things, and probably in the near future, sex semen will have the same fertility as normal semen. And in fact, because we evaluate the sperm one at a time, we might even be able to have higher fertility with sex semen than conventional semen if we're thinking a few years ahead. And then technologies like in vitro fertilization, So those are being promoted a lot these days for cattle reproduction, and there are niches that really does fit. One gets more calves per unit time with in vitro fertilization than with conventional embryo transfer, but it's also more expensive, so it doesn't fit every situation. A place where it fits nicely is combining it with sex semen, and so that's another product, combining technologies. One other thing about all these advanced technologies, they've got to be done on a foundation of good management. So if the nutrition isn't right, it's a mistake to try to superimpose these technologies. If the vaccination program isn't right, it won't work. So one's got to do all those management things appropriately to make these new technologies make any sense at all.
So, George, as you would visit with the cattle producer about the array of technologies, sex semen, in vitro, those in combination, basic ET, what do you tell those producers in as far as making a decision on which alternative is best for their operation?
That's a really good question. So let's start with what percentage of beef calves result from artificial insemination. And it's probably right around 10% these days. So for most beef operations, I would recommend taking the really proven technology of artificial insemination with genetically superior animals and start there, make an artificial insemination program work. And then you can superimpose these things on that, as opposed to starting with an embryo transfer program. Start with a good basic program of getting your nutrition and vaccinations right and maybe crossbreeding, and then think about, do I want to add embryo transfer? Do I want to add sex semen? And by the way, sex semen only works with artificial insemination, so you're stuck with that technology. Ovulation synchronization, or we sometimes say estrus synchronization, those programs are where you really need to start.
Have to ask you something of a loaded question. Is there room left for natural service in today's industry then?
Well, in my own cattle herd, I sure use cleanup bowls. So, yes. But one can use some of these technologies to improve natural insemination. For example, the genomics information. You probably should not be using a bull naturally that doesn't have a genomics evaluation, because for $35 or $50 you can get it and pick the best bulls for natural breeding. So, yeah, there's synergies of these new technologies with traditional things as well.
What's the next great leap forward or even step forward in improved technologies for reproduction in beef cattle production, keeping it in that venue? Is there anything that's looming out there that has your attention?
So 90% of the corn we feed our animals is from genetically modified plants. 90% of the soybeans. 70% of the cotton produce cottonseed. What percent of our cattle are genetically modified? 0. So in the long run, we can improve cattle and make them more relevant to our systems in the same way that that's been done with crops. And it will take a little bit of adjusting to do that. But in the long run, we can use the genetically modified procedures to not only improve production traits, but improve animal welfare traits. So, for example, adding the pole gene to breeds, or even take a particular bull and make a clone of him that's polled instead of horned. So these are welfare issues, resistance to disease, decreased mastitis in dairy cows, and so on. Now, how quickly we can get the public to accept those is another question. Are the procedures safe? I'd argue that they are actually even more safe than our traditional breeding methods from a scientific standpoint. But we've got to get the Federal Drug Administration to be happy with those techniques and get the public on board too.
But everything still has to gravitate back toward being economically practical to that producer's bottom line. That's attainable, you think?
So in the long run, yes. So corn seed is very expensive because of these genetically modified traits. But the fact that you don't need to deal with weeds or insects more than pays for it in the majority of cases. And it'll be the same thing with genetically modified cattle when we get there. One area that's a little bit more advanced in that respect is pigs. And now we have a strain of pigs that can't even get a disease because the virus can't enter the body. So those sorts of things, again, they're welfare things, they're economic things, there's food safety things that are coming along. And you're correct, they need to be economic. And what I find is that these technologies start as a research curiosity, and then they evolve to a niche application, and then they become more common as we understand how to make them more practical.
So, in closing, there's excitement yet in this field.
Yes. In fact, it's a more exciting time to be in these things than in the past because there's so much potential. And there's so many problems like global warming and greenhouse gases and so on. And these provide solutions to those problems.
George, it's a delight to have you here at K-State sharing some of these thoughts and many more with students and others at the university. And congratulations on an accomplished career. Thank you as well for your comments with us today.
Okay, and thank you.
George Seidel. He is a distinguished professor and animal scientist at Colorado State University, and he spoke on the role of new reproductive technologies in improving livestock production as the presenter of the 24th Kirchhoff Physiology Lecture at K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry Department. You're listening to Agriculture Today. More is coming your way shortly here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Agriculture Today closes out now with the very latest from the Weather Data Library here at K-State on Kansas agricultural weather. And Mike's side, as always, is Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. Well, Mary, we eagerly entertain positive news about our moisture situation in Kansas. But unfortunately, looking back over this past week, rainfall was spare once again.
Right. If we look at statewide averages, we averaged 0.13 of an inch, which was less than 20% of what we would normally see for the week. And that, of course, was not evenly distributed. That's the way things go. Eastern part of the state may have felt very damp and rainy, but we averaged only 0.42 of an inch, and that was 69% of normal. And that was the wettest division in the state. So I don't really need to say much more than that. Unfortunately, our neighbors down in the southwest part of the state averaged nothing again. That's not surprising that after these several weeks of dry weather and warmer temperatures, we've seen exceptional drought creep up into southwestern Kansas. We did, believe it or not, carve away a little bit on the abnormally dry conditions in the southeast part of the state. So if you look at drought-free areas of the state, there is a tiny corner in northwest and a tiny corner in southeast that are hanging on to near normal conditions. But the rest of the state, we're looking at anywhere from again, abnormally dry conditions to that exceptional drought.
What it's going to take sustained rain events over, a 3 or 4 week period, and we just haven't seen that for many, many months now.
Right. Well, and it's not just the sustained rain events that are important. It's also that we get substantial amounts out of those sustained rain events. For example, here in Manhattan, it was very drizzly, rainy all week long. Mm-hmm. That turned out to be about 1/10 of an inch of moisture, which is what we would expect on a single day, not an entire week. And that has some unfortunate consequences in that it's the perfect environment to get those foliar diseases, the rust going on the winter wheat. The mild temperatures, even on the cool side, with a lot of ambient moisture and a lot of dew on the leaves are perfect environments for that to be an issue. So producers that have wheat out there are going to want to be looking for those conditions and looking for some expansion of the disease pressure.
Speaking of temperatures, it was a relatively cool week as the numbers go, wasn't it?
Right. Not as cool as you might think. In the eastern part of the state, it was on the cool side. Northeast in particular was about 1/2 degree cooler than average for the week. The southeast was about 1 degree, almost 2 degrees warmer than normal. But as you move west, that departure starts getting a little bit stronger, and it's on the warm side. And down in the southwest, again, it was dry, it was warm, and there's a lot of sunshine. They average almost 6 degrees warmer than normal for the period. So, again, enhancing that impact of those dry conditions.
Well, Mary, we're knocking on the door of April. April the 1st is this Easter Sunday, and that means that there'll be producers contemplating planting corn soon. Are our soil temperatures starting to ramp up any?
Well, our soil temperatures are warming up a little bit. On our website, you can link to the soil temperature page and track what's happening in the various areas of the state. What is interesting is not just the average soil temperatures, which we've been reporting for some time, but you can also do a chart that will show how those daily temperatures have fluctuated, because it's not enough for it to hit that magic 55-degree temperature. What you want to do is have some consistent warmth so you're not losing that heat very rapidly. And in dry soils, that will happen. You will bounce up and down just like the air temperatures do. So again, if you go to the Mesonet page, mesonet.ksu.edu, and click on the banner that says soil temperatures, you can follow that and look at the station nearest your area and look at those 2 and 4 inch soil temperatures and watch how they're changing. And they are warming up. We're getting more sunshine, longer days. That helps warm it up. And again, keep in mind that your actual field conditions will differ depending upon how much moisture you've got in that field and what kind of cover you've got over it. Mm-hmm.
Take advantage of that information at mesonet.ksu.edu, that and much more at that site. Well, we are heading into this next week and see these somewhat enthusing predictions of moisture, but it's sort of the same refrain, isn't it, Mary?
Right. When you look at the outlooks, they've got chances of moisture. You look at the percentage chance of that, and you're looking at 30 to maybe 50% chance. It's not by any means a certainty. But what's even more depressing is if you look at that quantitative precip forecast, which looks at not just how likely is it to rain, but how much rain might be coming with that systems, it's not very encouraging. And basically from about the Topeka area eastward, you're looking at somewhere between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 an inch. Well, that sounds pretty good until you look at the fact that you should be getting about 65/100ths of an inch. So even with that, it would be less than you would typically fall during the week. If you go west of that, by the time you get to Manhattan, you're looking at 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch, again, substantially less than what we should be getting. But once you get, say, west of Abilene, Salina area, you're talking the probability is strongly towards nothing. A trace maybe, but again, not anything near 1/10 of an inch, which is, again, not very encouraging for that. When we look at the 8 to 10 day outlook, which carries us through about the 12th of April, they are calling for a slight chance towards wetter than normal, which would at least hopefully mean that we would get normal precip. And they're also calling for cooler than normal temperatures for that same period, which again gives a better chance that what moisture falls would actually penetrate the soil rather than evaporate as quickly as it falls. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Mary, thank you as always. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric.
Research and Extension climatologist at K-State, Mary Knapp, on Kansas agricultural weather. To you out there, have a happy and meaningful Easter weekend as well. Thanks for joining us right here. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over this, the K-State Radio Network.